The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, Concordant Body, Appendant Body, Masonic Authority, or CraftsmanOnline.com.
Hello and welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and we are closing out our month of July strong with our America 250 series. We'll be talking about the Empire State and their role in shaping not only Freemasonry, but also the founding of our country. First, though, you're invited to join us for summer school. We've teamed up with Arizona State University to promote their course, What the Founders Meant by Happiness, a journey through virtue and character. Now, this is in collaboration with the National Constitution Center, and it is truly one of the coolest online courses you'll ever take. First of all, it's free. It's appropriate for all ages. So from mom, dad, kids, Masonic brothers, students, anyone, you can learn more about self-mastery and really what our founding fathers were hoping we would do when it came to stepping up as a citizen and our role in this democracy. Get started for free online at craftsmanonline.com. All right, we're going to go out with a bang for America 250 as we catch up with our Deputy Grand Historian, Right Worshipful Brother Lee Justo. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you for having me back, Michael. Appreciate it.
Let's not overlook that, your appointment as a Deputy Grand Historian here for our Grand Lodge. How has this new role for you expanded your interest in history and continues to shape your Masonic experience?
I wouldn't say that it has. My interest for history has always been lifelong, and it's been pretty passionate. It's most helpful for me externally when I'm going to go meet with a site or I'm talking to a town historian. At least it gives me a little bit of a credential in the historian kind of realm.
What's kind of cool here is you are the final guest that we're going to have as part of our America 250 celebration during the month of July on Craftsman Online. And it was funny because a couple weeks ago, Worshipful Brother Wes Latchford, he lives in the Virginia area. And, you know, Virginia, like New York, big part in the beginning of our nation. A lot of the history that we talk about happened there. You and I were kind of talking about this earlier, where growing up as a kid, you may have overlooked some of this. But when it comes to famous Freemasons in New York during the American Revolution, George Washington is going to dominate the conversation. But there were other men that were a part of this that we can call brother. Who are some of these guys that helped shape the course of history, at least from New York State about 250 years ago?
Sure. The Gainsfort brothers were key. Leonard Gainsfort, these are both brothers from Union Lodge in Albany. And just to set a picture for Freemasonry in New York at that time, there were lodges in Manhattan. There was a big lodge in Poughkeepsie, Solomon's Lodge. And then Albany seems to be like the hub of Freemasonry at that time. You had St. George's Lodge up in Schenectady. There were a couple lodges in Albany. And, of course, you had St. Patrick's Lodge in Johnstown. And those three lodges cranked out so many Masonic brothers. And this is all information that I got from the Grand Historian Emeritus and all the work that he did. He did like a wonderful spreadsheet where he identified all of the brothers that he found, their military units, and their mother lodge. And it's a great document. It's been very helpful to me.
I've lived in upstate New York now longer than any other part of, where I grew up on the West Coast. But it's so fascinating when you and other brothers talk about American history, especially in upstate New York, and you mention Gainsfort or Schuylerville, and I'm like, oh, these are all little towns in my area. Now I know where these roads and these towns and these places got their name from these important men that were part of this big deal that we're celebrating after 250 years.
That's such a great point, because in my business, I cover a lot of the Bronx and Westchester County, and I drive through and I see these street signs. I'm like, oh, I know where that name came from. So I go through the exact same thing with you. Like they're Paulding streets, and he was one of the brothers who captured John Andre. And then over the past few years, I've done a lot of research in the Westchester Bronx area about the American Revolution and the brothers. And there are street names there that of obscure figures in that time period that you would never know, but that's like where their family farm was. I actually remember driving through Virginia and seeing all the Civil War battlefields and being so jealous that everyone, like if you live there, you live by all these like historic sites. I had no idea that so much happened during the American Revolution within walking distance from where I grew up. And I really didn't find that out until later in life when I started doing the research.
You came on the podcast about a year and a half ago, I feel like, to give us the heads up, like, hey, America 250 is coming. It was almost like, one if by land, two if by sea almost, with your lantern. And, I'm hoping lodges around New York State have spent the last year to kind of gather up some information, if not to share with the public and invite them into the lodge and do some sort of a community event, at least for the brothers there. Because what I always find fascinating is some of us are very lucky, whether you have a lodge that was formed in upstate New York before New York was a state or America was a country, or you're a member of a lodge that's easily over 100 years old. There's a lot of those as well across our grand jurisdictions. It's the records and the minutes that have been preserved over all of this time where you really find these like little gems. I know you and I have shared some of the discovery that, led you to your path and celebrating your lodge's history. But what other things have you found just by casually looking through old lodge records and dusty old documents?
Well, the first thing is now the Livingston Library has our meeting minutes from our first meeting. And in that, they say we opened on the first step of masonry. So that was basically the first degree. They didn't say degree, they said the step, which was just a interesting little tidbit to me. We also have our lodge records from around the Civil War, and one of the men who sat as secretary and also filled in as master was Colonel Henry Steele Alcott, who, if you know anything about Theosophy, he was one of the founders with Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society. I discovered that he left this country, became a Buddhist, and moved to, I believe it was Sri Lanka. Set up a school there, and he's so revered there. At one point, they had a postage stamp with his picture on it to honor him. But he was what's fascinating from American history. He was a officer during the Civil War who basically worked logistics, but he was put on the committee to investigate the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Isn't that wild when you find a brother did all this stuff and here he was a member of your lodge and you actually have his writing as secretary.
The other thing I've always wondered, because my lodge here in Troy will have a secretary's minutes night, which is kind of cool. They've digitized over the years all of the records of Mount Zion Lodge number 311. And our secretary, Right Worshipful Brother Tim Smith, will say, okay, pick a date. And then we'll just throw out a date and he'll go, and he'll pull up the random meeting minutes or on our birthday, he'll say, when do you want it from? What year? And I'll say, 1978. Here's what happened on January 14th, 1978. Here's what the brothers discussed in lodge. And it's really cool to get those kind of flashbacks. Now, as I get older, and especially during America 250, I'm looking to see what conversations were happening in lodge about what was going on during that time. And are you uncovering anything that would indicate those discussions?
I really had a laugh when I started reading through our minute books because it doesn't matter what time period of history it is. A lodge meeting's a lodge meeting. They're talking about a brother who didn't pay their dues, someone who's sick. It's all the same stuff. I was hysterical. I'm like, things do not change.
So we could be in World War II. There's a draft that's going on. The British are coming, and we're still concerned about the cracks in the sidewalk and the roof needs some repairs.
Exactly.
That is
exactly. And this is something I laugh about when I hear all these crazy conspiracy theories, because if you've been a Mason more than 6 months and you believe any of the crazy conspiracies that are out there, there's something wrong with you because you've experienced it. And I just if only they could see our minute meetings, if only they could sit in a lodge meeting and see it's just such mundane stuff that we talk about in lodge. Yes, we definitely have education and things like that. And we do our ritual, but at the end of the day, a lodge meeting is a lodge meeting.
And honestly, to your point, I'm thinking now, I've seen brothers still to this day who still the secretaries will take the minutes by hand with paper and pen. More often than not, in modern times now, you see guys with a laptop open and they're writing things down. but it really isn't super in depth, depending on, how much the secretary gets into the minutes. Sometimes it's like there were 20 guys present. We opened at this, we did that. This person had a program under sickness and distress, this, and this, and the lodge was closed at this time. Like, you're not getting, and brother so-and-so rose to speak about blah, 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 and eloquently describe, blah, 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 blah. Like, you're not getting that in our lodge minutes. You're just kind of getting a snapshot of like who was there that evening.
To me, that's the most fascinating thing to look at is the visitor log. Because people come, you have brothers visiting from all over the world, even 230 years ago.
This is one of the things I'm extremely proud of when I tell people, like, my mother lodge is older than the United States of America, officially as a country. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, we got our charter back in 1774. And we affectionately refer to these as colonial lodges. And to your point, I guess, closing out this month, I didn't really even think about it. Like, yeah, we have the 3 out of the top 5 oldest lodges are right here in my area, with St. Pat's, St. George's, Mount Vernon, Master's Lodge. Like, these are the single digit numbers. Aside from their original charters and warrants, like, what else, as far as in a history sense, are we looking to preserve across New York Freemasonry?
We started a program where we're trying to identify all the buildings across the state and record the ones that are owned by either a lodge or a guild or a historical society run by Masons. And we're trying to identify how old they are and kind of catalog that, because we have lost so many beautiful buildings in the state. We can't afford them anymore. I mean, our numbers just aren't there. When a lot of these buildings were built, there were like 600 men in a lodge. Now we're lucky to get 6 to form a meeting in a lot of these lodges. So, it's a very different time.
Talk about America 250, it's not like, oh, let's bring out these brothers from this really old lodge and they have some famous people that did important things, way back when your great-great-great-grandfather was walking around. It is a continuation, and I made this comment earlier with a guest during our America 250 podcast series, where just simply the act of attending lodge, you are preserving history, you are advancing Freemasonry by being present. What you do beyond that, of course, adds and enhances the things we do to support our craft, but we have to be active, and part of it is making the step as Master Masons is going to lodges and traveling around our jurisdiction.
Oh, I am such a big believer in traveling. I love visiting lodges. And to me, if you don't travel, you're missing out. You're not really having the full Masonic experience.
Every lodge, whether it's the small handful of colonial lodges, but every lodge across our jurisdiction has a unique historical point. Usually it's a picture or a story or sometimes an artifact that they're like, hey, do you want to see this? And you're like, no, wait, you have this? Like, that's awesome. Or here's this really cool story that you may not know. You're like, that is pretty freaking cool. Like, I'd be proud to be a member of a lodge with something like that. And I feel as a Master Mason, if you're not going around our state or around the country, if you can, you're missing out on hearing this full story.
Oh, I agree 100%. And here's a perfect example for the time period we're talking about. My lodge was chartered in 1796. We're going to be celebrating our 230th this year, which we're very excited and proud about. But the first brothers to meet our lodge or come visit were from Independent Royal Arch Lodge. And I went to go visit them maybe about a month ago. And I noticed the jewels for their deacons are completely different than every other lodge in New York. And then I also visited Holland Lodge maybe last year. And, their ritual is a little bit different. So is Independent Royal Arches. Just a little bit, not dramatically so, but had little nuances that were different. You would never know that unless you went and visited these lodges and experienced that.
One of the topics that came up with the previous guests was the provincial Grand Lodges that existed across, the United States until we finally set up our Grand Lodge system. The Grand Lodge in New York actually goes back to 1782. Our provincial Grand Lodge warrant was chartered back in 1781. Then we declared our independence and moved forward. Can you explain this transition and the importance of going from a provincial Grand Lodge to what is now the Grand Lodge of the state of New York?
When you interviewed the brother from upstate who talked about William Johnson, did he tell you about Sir John Johnson and him fleeing up to Canada and taking the charter and everything else with him?
We got the whole story. It was pretty fascinating.
Okay. All right. No, it's a great story, right? So his wife was actually the sister of one of my lodge brothers. It was a very small world. And he was the provincial Grand Master of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania in 1776 when the war started. So obviously he went bye-bye. What I found very interesting to me was Samuel Seabury. I don't know if you know who Samuel Seabury was, but he would become the first Episcopal bishop in the United States. And he was a loyalist, and he wrote letters he called himself a Westchester farmer, and he had this letter duel with Alexander Hamilton. And they do this. I don't know if you've ever seen the musical Hamilton, but
oh yeah,
yeah. There's a song where Samuel Seabury and him are rapping back and forth. That's based on this, right? So Samuel Seabury gave, I guess, a talk to Zion Lodge in Manhattan at St. Paul's Chapel. It's really beautiful stuff. And after the war, he came back to the United States as a bishop. And he paid homage to George Washington and dedicated a talk to him. And he said, our most worshipful Grand Master. So he really became from outspoken loyalist to an American. Just fascinating transition. And I feel like the same thing kind of happened with Masonry in that period.
Masonry in upstate New York existed before New York was a state and before there was the United States of America. Freemasonry, as far as our Grand Lodge, we had just shared, our Grand Lodge became in existence around 1781. New York becomes a state in 1788. There is a really powerful person whose name is the name of our Grand Library, the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Library in New York City. For those outside of our area, or just brothers who may not know about him, what was his role, and why do we have a library, and why do we look at him as such a big, prominent figure in New York Masonry?
Well, I think the biggest thing is he's the one who swore George Washington in as president. And he did so on St. John's Lodge's Bible. His position in New York, he was the recorder, which is kind of like the attorney general kind of role, from what I understand. And interestingly, John Watts Jr., he was a judge in Westchester County at a time, and he was a member of my lodge. And he has, I don't know if you've ever been to Trinity Church, Wall Street, but there's this really tall copper statue of this man, and that's John Watts Jr. That was Sir John Johnson's wife's brother. The world back then was small, and everyone was interconnected, especially if you were of any means, because they would marry for like business connections. And
our craft, as we look at America 250, and we go back, and America was small, and Buffalo was considered the Western territories back then, like it was the wilderness.
It was the Wild West back then.
Yeah.
I mean, there were elk and moose up there back then. Yeah, I mean, it's just a completely different world. Yeah.
Yes, our population has exploded, but when it comes to Freemasonry, our membership is starting to come back down to smaller numbers, right? But it is, when you talk about the knowing a few people, I feel that way now. I go to a lodge and, there's 8, 9, 10 guys maybe they're opening up the lodge that are active, that are a part of it. Happy to sit down with them, making those connections with them at dinner. And I'm like, I just made 10 new best friends, Oh,
it's great, isn't it? I love that. I visited a lodge in Albany. I'm not in Albany, in Syracuse this past year. And it was actually Gary Heimiller's
nice.
Grand Historian's Lodge. And the master of that is now an area historian up there. But when I visited, there were 3 brothers from England who were I think they were taking like a month off, and they were just traveling from Massachusetts to, I think, Washington State. And all they were doing was visiting a Masonic Lodge every night. I thought it was the coolest thing,
Nice. So one of the things I want to give you credit for, we highlighted it, and there was the final printed out, nice glossy version available. You were a big part of the walking maps for the Grand Lodge of New York and laying out the history and getting things lined up. If you visit our Grand Lodge building this summer in Manhattan, you can walk in, you can get one of these maps and walk around Central Park and other parts of New York City. Give us a virtual, well, at least for our podcast listener, an overview of what they would experience taking this walking tour and the work that, behind the scenes, that how you pulled all of this together, Lee.
Right Worshipful Brother Ivan Barthe, he developed these walking tours, and really all the credit really belongs with him. He had been giving them prior when people would come in from out of town. He's a member of La Fraternidad Lodge, which is one of our Spanish-speaking lodges, and they get visitors in from South America all the time and elsewhere, and he would take them on these tours. So we took all the sites he identified, we put them onto these brochures, and there's a little description of each site. Like Cleopatra's Needle is on there. Oh my goodness, Robert Burns' statue's on there. Downtown 4, there's St. Paul's Chapel that I just mentioned. There's Francis Tavern, the Canyon of Heroes, which most people don't know this, but the Canyon of Heroes is where they have all the ticker tape parades. Like, say the Yankees win. Yeah, like the Yankees win, or some dignitary. And there are little monuments along the sidewalk of people who were dedicated. The first person that started this whole thing was Marquis de Lafayette when he visited back in 1824. So, that's on there. There were all these little, interesting tidbits of history connected to Freemasonry.
I feel like I just learned something. I mean, I know about Canyon of Heroes, and it's funny we both said when the Yankees won the World Series, because that's when it's all across the news, right? The Canyon of Heroes is actually not for sports figures.
That's correct.
I really have appreciated your time, and I always enjoy hanging out with you. I mean, obviously, I just feel like I got a golden nugget there. I feel so much smarter when I can say, the Canyon of Heroes isn't just because Derek Jeter was probably the best shortstop the Yankees ever had.
Well, we should talk about before we cut off, what we're doing for the Grand Lodge. The next event we're going to have out in Rochester, and that is going to commemorate a soldier by the name of Boyd. And there's a whole story about him that you will find out if you go to that. And then September, I want to say the 27th, we're going to be having a dinner at the old 76 House in Japan, which is just a stone's throw away from the DeWint House. You could literally walk there. So I really want to encourage all you brothers out there who are listening to this, get active in your lodge. Make sure you guys do something for the community to remind them that we had a role in the American Revolution and the foundation of our country.
It also helps you feel like you're totally a part of a bigger thing. Not just that there's all these other brothers around and you get to support that, but you get to look back at history and say, wow, for 250 years, guys just like me have been here advancing and continuing to do this. And I think it's a great way to kind of wrap up this discussion, because
it's truly humbling. It really is.
If you weren't ready for America 250 with Right Worshipful Brother Lee Justo coming with his lantern and say, America 250 is coming, America 250 is coming. Just some simple math. For those of us that are still planning on being here in 25 years, we'll be celebrating our 275th anniversary. It's never too early to start planning. So, Brother Lee, what advice do you have for lodges and brothers that maybe if you want to look 25 years down the road, but let's just talk about 5 or 6, what can they be doing now to preserve or prepare their archives for our next milestone event?
Well, digitizing is a big thing, but I also want to encourage all the brothers out there, just get involved locally with your local historians, town historians. They're going to be fascinated by all the information you have about, certain men who probably played a prominent role in your local community.
I am looking forward to seeing you out and about this summer and celebrating our great legacy with the Grand Lodge of New York. Right Worshipful Brother Lee Justo, Deputy Grand Historian. Thanks for coming on this episode.
Thank you so much, brother. I'll see you soon.
Thanks again to my guest this week, Right Worshipful Brother Lee Justo, Deputy Grand Historian for the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. If you've enjoyed the Craftsman Online podcast, I'm sure you've done this already, but if you have like an interesting brother in lodge, make sure you tell him about our podcast. Yeah, let him know that he can listen, everywhere he hears his favorite podcast episodes. Or if the idea of listening to a radio program essentially on your phone is novel to him, do us a favor. Show him how to sign up and get into it as well. We thank you in advance. Next week, we are back to the books. Yes, Brother Brian Maddox is on to share his new book, A Mason's Work. Until then, let peace and harmony prevail.